My sex ed started in year 5, I had it in year 6 and then year 9, and I don't think I had any after year 9.
My sex ed was probably better in year 6 than it was in secondary school. When you have it in year 9 and you don't have it in year 11 when you're legally allowed to have sex, I feel like that's a bit...
After year 8 then I don't think we were taught anything else.
Boys got to go out and play on the playground and we had to have sex then.
Starting with a simple discussion, it quickly became clear to us that although in no way a complete failure, sex and relationship education in the UK is far from perfect. This was something we could address. In order to understand the current state of sex and relationship education, we thought it was important to ground ourselves in its history. Creating a timeline of events that brings us to the modern day, we believe we can explain how our approach to SRE fits in with the social movement towards a more open and better emphasised sex and relationship education programme. The sexual revolution of the 1960s, as well as the introduction and normalisation of birth control, began a new stage of open discussion about sex and relationships, symbolised by the move to the availability of free condoms on the NHS in 1974. Almost 20 years later, in 1993, the Education Act put sex education on the national curriculum in response to the AIDS epidemic. This requires the teaching of basic biology only. In 2000, Brighton University conducted a study that showed girls felt SRE focused too much on the mechanics of sex and contraception, but not enough on the emotional side. This is something we will show is still reflected today. In 2013, Ofsted produced a report, Not Yet Good Enough, that echoes the Brighton University report conducted 13 years previously, in saying SRE is too mechanical and has too little focus on relationships and other important issues. By March of this year, the government tables amendments to the Children and Social Work Bill, which requires all secondary schools in England to teach sex and relationship education. We believe this timeline shows that our project is something that has been a long time coming. We hope that our campaign will help to push the future of sex and relationship education in the right direction. Having brought our problem from a single group discussion to a fully fledged and backed up social issue, we now wanted to know more about individual experiences of sex and relationship education from students who have been through it themselves around the country. In order to do this, we organised 2 focus groups of students who grew up around the UK.
The girls were asked to put a condom or roll a condom onto a cucumber or a dildo or whatever. That was the only sex education I ever had. I didn't have anything apart from that.
I didn't even think I don't think consent at all. So yeah, they were left in the dark quite a lot.
We had a PowerPoint about STDs with pictures. They just told us about contraception and how it works.
They taught us about the pill, but they didn't ever kind of talk about the risks with the pill.
When the nurse came in, she brought in a leaflet with all the information about all different kinds of contraception.
Boys in a gay relationship and then girls in gay relationships. I had no clue.
The 2 people in the same gender having sex, it was never mentioned at all. No.
Nothing about relationships when I learned about it. It was all like biological side, like what happens when you go through puberty.
This is sexual and relationship education, but I only had the sexual education. There was no relationship education.
It was still being taught to us by a middle-aged nurse. We had it with our form tutors. So then you had to look this person in the eye for the rest of the year.
If you have the same teacher that you'd have for all the rest of your citizenship classes, I think the students just aren't very... They don't engage with it. I feel like the teacher's perspective was, let's just get through the session, let's just teach them and then they leave. I think the nurse is a great idea because they have authority. Students aren't used to them and so they'll probably more likely listen.
In conversation with Francesca Root from the University of Cambridge, we were able to further clarify the importance of the application of SRE and why learning from the people who understand and relate to contemporary issues is highly beneficial.
There's so many problems with the way that sex education is taught. It needs to come from people who know that world. And at the end of the day, that is either very clued up people of all generations or people who are young and have grown up in a digital world.
Hearing from people's personal experiences, we came to the conclusion that the most effective way to start tackling the problems in the UK's secondary sexual and relationship education is to encourage the schools to adapt their approach to a modern context where students, rather than the curriculum, are central to the delivery of SRE. The important features are that these would be regular weekly sessions that would run in tandem with young, trained volunteers and professionals. Our sessions would come in 3 parts, addressing what we think would be the essential aspects of an effective SRE session. Part 1. Meeting the students where they are at. This part of the session would consist of a facilitated peer discussion with minimal interference from the teachers, based around a pre-established theme. This would serve the purpose of finding out what the students know and what they needed to know or wanted to know. Part 2. Providing contextual knowledge. This would be a response from the teachers and volunteers addressing things that were mentioned in the discussion, providing a base that the students can learn from. Part 3. The students' critical evaluation. This last part provides a chance for the students to question and challenge the information that they were provided with, to clarify what has been learned, and to put the focus of the conversation back into the students' hands. We believe that this would address those things that we thought were lacking in usual SRE sessions. In order to evaluate our approach, we thought it would be beneficial to allow the members of our focus groups the chance to give us feedback. In order to deliver effective SRE sessions, they need to be regular.
Yeah, I think the positive of that is that regularly. You said it was going to be every week. That's important.
I was more likely to forget quite a lot of information just because it wasn't reinforced.
The regularity of it, I think that's very good. Having sessions when you're younger and then when it's not relevant, and then not having them when you're older and you need it is a problem. Consistency is a very good point of your model there.
Our current approach is that we would be aiming for weekly sessions, each between an hour or 2 long. Regular sessions allow students to become comfortable with the topics, also allowing for a greater range of issues to be addressed as a result. Mentioned criticisms of how typical sessions tend to be too mechanical could be addressed by providing more space for freeform and personal discussion. Topics we would be addressing would likely be done in group series, so that we could address overarching topics like sexuality and sexual practices, consent and healthy relationships over several sessions. This allows for the scalability of the content we are addressing, as well as leaving the room for students to become familiar with the topic or to not take part in later sessions if they're not comfortable with the material being covered. This brings us to the next point of feedback, acknowledging the potential vulnerability of some of our students.
What needs to happen is there needs to be no stupid questions. There needs to be a non-judgmental space where people can ask and learn.
So I didn't get that non-judgmental space, the safe space, I guess, and the importance of it and what it means. That's something that would have been beneficial to have, I think.
We recognise that some students may be more vulnerable than others in these sessions. As a result, our sessions aim to provide a safe space for students to address potentially emotionally challenging subjects in order for them to develop a more informed, personal opinion rather than one which is rigid and prescriptive. While student sensitivity is something to be aware of, in itself, it is a fundamental motivator for our campaign. This is why our campaign is so important, to help normalize the topic of sex and relationships, resisting our individual socialization that it is a taboo. This taboo is the reason for people not talking about those things that they might need to talk about. As mentioned before, our staggered series of sessions allow a space for students to pull out in extreme cases where it is more beneficial for them to be absent. Our last point is the most vital to ensure the success of this initiative. Schools need to start prioritising SRE.
I think the school would have to highly prioritise having this scheme to make it like the success which it could be.
The school has to be completely on board with it.
The only way this will happen is if conversations about SRE are normalised from the bottom up, from the people to the schools and the policymakers. If the individuals of a system aren't comfortable with talking about the changes that need to happen, then stagnation and a business-as-usual strategy is likely to persist. If our appeal has done anything, we hope that it has shown you that this is not acceptable. So now, we appeal to you for help. If you're a student, then talk to your teachers. If you're a teacher, then talk to your policymakers. Saying this, no matter who you are, it's up to you to take the initiative, to start the conversation. break down the barriers. What's your next step?